Hello.
Yeah, good evening, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll stick to the same thing we did last time. I would expect you to keep the slides and present them from your end and just follow my lead as we carry on with the discussion. Is that okay?
Yes, sir, sure. Um, we are still waiting for a few participants. Only 30 participants have joined so far.
Okay, then. So you let me know when we will start. So I'll be here. Okay.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Good evening, sir. Thanks for the wonderful session day before yesterday. I'm a special educator working with special needs children. I just wanted to understand the hand dominance related no, developmental stage. Like some children, even beyond the age of 5 or 6, they are still no using both their hands to do the activities. Is that right? Or can we no should we stop and then help them to know use only right or left no what is the actual thing we need to follow on that front? Can you please guide?
I think sir is going to hold a question answer session towards the end of the meet. We can entertain the questions at that time.
No worries, thank you.
Participants, please note, we will start the session exactly at 6:40. We won't delay any further. At 6:40, we will start.
So yeah, hi. We wait any further?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Cognify workshop. We are ReWire, student-run impact-oriented cognitive enhancement initiative, a part of Shaastra IIT Madras' technical list. We aim to use revolutionary modern methods of neuroscience to achieve our goal of sharpening minds using multisensory learning. We aspire to make a large-scale and long-term impact on people's lives, with a special focus on people who fall under the spectrum of neurodivergence. Cognify is an initiative that aims to fill a crucial gap in the Indian market by encouraging multisensory learning through the use of STEM toys, with a focus on being inclusive for neurodivergent children. It is our goal to delve into the principles of cognitive neuroscience and arrive at innovative designs for young children to sharpen their minds. This competition invites participants from across India to develop toy concepts that promote cognitive development and inclusivity for neurodivergent children. By joining this competition, you'll have the opportunity to compete for a share of 1 lakh rupees and get your design mass produced, marketed, and patented in collaboration with Help Them Shine. We would like to thank our title partner, Help Them Shine. Help Them Shine is the first first company in India that offers global therapeutic and therapy products for special needs children. They are dedicated to supporting children with developmental disorders like autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, and other neurodiverse conditions. Their mission is to empower children by providing resources, therapies, and tools that enhance their development, learning, and overall quality of life. To know more, please visit their website at www.helpthemshine.com. It is our privilege today to have with us Dr. Velprashanth Venkatesan, who will be leading us through a session on neurocognition and cognitive functions. Dr. Venkatesan is an esteemed psychiatrist, having earned his MD in psychiatry from the Central Institute of Psychiatry, Ranchi, where he was recognized with the Best Psychiatry Resident Award and the Gold Medal. He further pursued his DM in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research in Chandigarh, one of the premier institutes in the country. Dr. Venkatesan has received extensive training across a broad range of areas, including psychiatric emergencies, substance use disorders, mood and anxiety disorders, psychotic spectrum disorders, childhood development disorders, and epilepsy. His clinical approach integrates cognitive behavioral therapy and family-focused therapies with a focus on creating personalized treatment plans for each patient. He is a member of respected organizations such as the Indian Psychiatric Society and the Indian Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health. And his contributions to the field are reflected in several research papers covering topics ranging from circadian rhythms in bipolar disorder to influence of Western colonial psychology on Indian thought. We are deeply honored to have Dr. Venkatesan with us today. Please join me in welcoming him as he shares his expertise with us.
Thank you again. Thank you again for the generous introduction. So I hope the last session where we covered basically just these four domains, although these four domains where we just took a glimpse into what development looks like from inside the brain and how it looks like for the child as we see the child growing, and what are all those important domains of neurocognition. And then we move towards a little bit of overview towards neurodiversity. We touched upon certain common conditions of neurodiversity and also a little bit about sensory issues and sensory processing. So one of the things that I think would require a further highlight, if I have to say, is cognition operates on a hierarchy. You could recall the presentation, and I have been informed that every one of you have got the PowerPoint which has been prepared here. So I hope you have gone through that. One of the things that you have to understand is cognition operates on a hierarchy. So I would just have to highlight again that when we look at these cognitive domains, there is a layer that is built on one by one. That's something which I just need to reiterate once again here. So the basic level, the cognition requires attention. And with the presence of attention, you start building upon the other things. So the basic capacity that you look at right from childhood is just the capacity to show attention. And then comes the executive function, which is designed to make you work towards goal-directed activities. And with that, slowly you evolve into creation of language. And with language, there is an important breakthrough. With language, you start creating meaningful memories. And as memory starts encoding, you start having a more elaborate collective event and episode based life sequence, which defines your personality and character. And slowly you go towards higher end and finally culminate at the level of social cognition. And I keep saying this again and again. When we are assessing and when we are looking at any person's cognitive capacity, the foundational issue here is if the basic cognitive functions are not tapped into, the higher cognitions are obviously not going to be effective in terms of expression. So the simplest example here is if a child is so distracted, if a child is absolutely not wanting to engage with a toy, which means this is a toy which is not even tapping into the attention aspect of the child. You forget the child's executive functions or language or even memory, all those things getting even engaged by this toy. So I hope that message is clear. So the basic aspect here is to remember that there is a hierarchy. There is a layer that you need to bounce off and cross. If a toy is actively engaging a child's role play or social cognition, then again it is understood that this is engaging everything that is beneath it. It is engaging the child's language, memory, executive function, and attention. Hope that aspect of this is clear. I just want to put this out before we move on to today's session. Today's key ideas here are just in front of the screen. So, although we'll be covering lots of domains, this will be much shorter compared to the last session we've had. So, we'll just try to understand how important play is for children. And as we need to remember our own childhood as we go through this presentation, tap into our inner child and then remember how easy it was for certain experiences to just happen just like that. You played, you had a good time, and then you ended up learning something. So that's what play does. Play is something which is one of the most inner drives of human nature. There's a famous saying in all of psychology, all of our inner drives comes down to three things: love, work, and play. There is just changes and variations of this as we grow higher and higher into adulthood. But it all comes down to these three elements of whatever we do. So with this, I would like to just start today's presentation to understand right from the basic aspects of what is the role of play in cognitive enhancement and how naturally playing itself is going to ensure the child develops properly. Next slide. So one of the key ideas in all of child developmental psychology and the concept which inspires many child psychiatrists like me when I started understanding this concept really wanted me to pursue this field was this idea that came almost a century ago by this amazing person called Jean Piaget, who started observing his own children, his own niece and nephews, and gave a profound understanding of how cognition develops over time as a child grows. So I'll just keep it simple for you to not make it too boring or more of an academic lecture. So there are stages here. That's what we are trying to understand. Right when the child is born, till the time the child is mature enough to be an adolescent, who then goes on to become a fully mature adult, there are stages that the child goes through one by one. And with each stage, it's almost like a vehicle that gets updated and updated, or a software that gets more and more enhanced. So the nuances and the skills of how the child is able to think keeps on improving with each of these stages. And it starts from the most basic stage called the sensory motor stage, which Piaget described happens right from the time of birth till the child is about 2 years. So when we're looking at this child who is just less than 2 years, what we are trying to understand using this idea from Piaget is this is a child who often is only going to be a product of its own reflexes. Right? This is a child who is just slowly shaping up its basic motor skills, basic. fundamental phonemic language skills, and probably is not yet even derived into any kind of social knowledge. So, what we mean by sensory motor is the child is born with certain reflexes which will enable the child to, just like a reaction, start reacting to the stimulus around it. So the entire aspect of the first 2 years is the child slowly grasping onto these reflexes and again trying to re-experience those sensory pleasures again and again. So this happens in simple way of the child who just starts falling down and then crawling up and then again slowly starting to crawl and slowly will walk on its knees and slowly try to learn by how the child has to start walking. What motivates for all these things is the basic aspect of this child to re-experience certain sensations again and again. So what Piaget explains here is in the first 2 years, a child is going to only understand simple sensory pleasures. And it's only by the end of these 2 years the child slowly grasps any kind of thought or a meaningful symbolic ideas in his head. So what he says is the moment the child is around the age of 2 and above, it has crossed one important barrier. The first barrier is the concept of symbolic thought. So what he said is it's only after 2 years the child for the first time can actually visualize something which the child need not see in person in front of it. So before 2 years, it's only seeing and believing. But after 2 years, the child can conceptualize symbolic ideas in its head and conceptualize things and visualize these things and start conceptualizing how it would look like in the head. And that is when the child moves on to the next stage called the pre-operational stage. Pre-operational stage is when the child can understand how things work and remember them and see a pattern inside the head and symbolically understand these things. So this is for the first time the child can actually envision the idea of mom. If you say mom, the child can look at images of mom in its head. Or rather, a very, very young child who is 1 and a half is only going to look for mom. This is the age when peekaboo starts becoming boring. One of the fascinating things of peekaboo when you play with a 1 year old child is if you close your face, you cease to exist, and once you reveal your face, you're there. And that is so funny for this child and starts laughing. But by the time this child is 2, it's going to be weirded off by, of course, I know you're there. So that's the barrier that is crossed. The child knows you're there. The idea of you is still inside the child's head. That barrier is crossed by the age of around 2 as the child steps into the pre-operational stage. Now, in the pre-operational stage is fantastic because here the child is already a master of its own reflexes. The child knows precisely what kind of stimulus will get what kind of reaction from itself. So by this time, the child starts doing something to the next level, which is manipulation of its own environment. It's only by the age of around this 2.5 to 3, as the child is described to be in this pre-operational stage, it is having a little bit of control over its motor aspects. The child is by now walking, running up. The child is able to say a few words. It is able to draw attention. And slowly, the child has learned that I can do something on my own will, in my own voluntary level, and create some changes in the environment. And that is so good. That is so fascinating for this child. It is so crazy for this child. How this child is going to run around. This child is going to try absolutely everything. This is a child who is now completely unhinged. Every small thing is fascinating for this child. Now, this is the peak at which this is a child who is going to experience the world to its fullest at the age of around this 2.5. It's often why you call this 2 years as something called the terrible two. Children at the age of 2 are the most difficult in management. They're not going to stay put in one place. And this is also the age where any kind of your executive function has just only started to build. So there is no self-control here. There is no inhibition. There is absolutely no working memory. The child is 100% living in the moment and would want to try everything around it. So he's going to put everything in his mouth. He's going to touch everything and enjoy all his sensory experiences. He's going to jump. She's going to run around. And he or she's going to utter absolutely everything that comes in his mouth because it's fun to do it. Right? And this is the age where the child has not fully developed any aspect of higher executive functions or not really the advanced social cognition. The nascent language is just starting up. Memory is still going to take shape over the next few years. So this is the child who is going to be entertained by absolutely everything. And this is the age when toys really work. And what really bugs you out is It is not the quality, or it is not the level of sophistication of the toy that matters here. It is just how much fun the toy is, how much the child is able to see the real time changes as it engages with the toy. Sometimes the keychain is much more fun than just looking at a Rubik's Cube, because the keychain gives you a lot of sounds, it's going to change, it's going to be dropped. Sometimes some children will like a Rubik's Cube, but then they've not yet tapped into the inner workings of a Rubik's Cube. So it's pretty early for them. They might just be attracted for the color for a few moments before they get distracted to something else. That's this level where we're looking at. And by the experiences that the child is gaining through these ages, the child is slowly starting to understand that there is a pattern through which how my world works. There is a predictable pattern in things that are established around my environment. And by the age of around 5, 6, and 7, this becomes quite clear for this child. The child starts working around certain fixed rules which the child has now learned through his or her experience. So by the time the child is in the age of 7 or 11, what Piaget describes is the child has achieved something called conservation. The simplest example of conservation is the experiment with the two kinds of jars. You take same amount of liquid, let's say 150 ml of a blue color liquid, and then you have a very slim but a tall jar, and you have very flat and wide but a very short jar. And it's the same amount that you're going to pour into both of it, right? But the taller jar will make the liquid appear much higher, and the flatter one would look at the liquid as if it's in the lower level. A child who is still in the pre-operational stage would probably think the slender but the taller jar has more liquid than the other one. But by the time the child is at the end of its pre-operational stage, it has figured out pretty much if you can transfer the liquid to here and if I could transfer it back to this, there is a conservation of all these things, which means there is a kind of a fixity to this world. This child knows how mass and quantity are pretty same around. The child knows that there is a notion of reason. Some things will happen if I do this. The child knows that if I do this, I will get that. So this is the age when the child will really, really look at immediate consequences and learn from the consequences. The objective learning starts taking full shape by the time the child is at the end of the pre-operational. That is why the child moves from more of an experiential, play-based learning to more of an academic, more of a didactic kind of a learning. That is how our education system is also fortunately or unfortunately designed. As the child moves from this, the child is able to tap into more of a listening, more of a language-based learning because the child can now work with fixed rules. And by the time the child is in the concrete operational stage, the child is going to be very, very clear about what it wants. This is the age when child has understood little basic workings of the world. The child has developed something called reasoning. This is the age where the child can try and manipulate the toys and can learn how every toy functions. This is the age when the child can maybe learn a lot of skills. It can play a sport, it can play rule-based games, it can manipulate certain devices and know how to get some jobs done. And interestingly, most of the children by this age start moving from simple experiences that involve just toys and games to more elaborate experiences with other children. So the social cognition takes full shape by the time the child is in concrete operational stage because there are social rules that I'm going to enjoy. This is a child who's going to understand I have to cooperate with a couple of the other children so that we can build something together. I'm going to play by the rules so that we're all going to have fun. So the social domains are quite active by this time. And finally, they culminate in what we call as the formal operational stage, which Piaget 12 years. And what we mean by this final level is the child is now gone into more of advanced thinking, where you are going to understand the child grasping many hypothetical concepts. The child has very advanced level of imagination. The child is now able to conceptualize things in ways it could have been, should have been, and can come into certain curious levels of analysis. It can derive certain hypotheses and try it out. And this is the age when child will completely understand anything which is abstract, like love, like passion, like whatever is it is to be someone who's patriotic. These are ideas which will make sense to a person who's at the formal operational level. Now, why we need to understand is The lot of design that we are going to, if at all, consider should take into account the developmental stage of the child. So if at all you're going to have a design, you need to know what the end product will offer and who it will offer for. Next slide. So based on this, you can understand play also can be into three types. Right? Now the notion here is play is now just divided based on the level of structure that is applied on. If there is no structure, it is called free play. Free play is something which is understood to be completely childlike. There are no targets, there are no goals here. Probably there is a goal which is only to have fun. If a child is going to be in a bathroom just spraying water around, there is no structure to it, but it's a lot of fun while the child is engaged in that. And that's an example of your free play. The child is given some kind of sand or a mud, and the child is just going to make some patterns all around, and with no goal, is just going to have a good time. That's again a free play. Then slowly, as the child grows into some level of maturity, as we saw the stages, as the child is going into the age of 3, 4, is going to understand language pretty clearly by now. The child can listen and respond to certain instructions. So this is also the age where we find the child has completely moved from just the sensory motor stage to a pre-operational stage, which means the child is now able to explore and manipulate the environment and gather information. And as the language develops, the child can take inputs and follow certain rules, but not completely. Right? Guided play is when you have a child who can understand certain things in the environment, but will not completely adhere to those things. That's when you're there as a parent to just give a little nudge, give a little instruction. So maybe you're sitting with the child and playing with blocks here. Right? You can at best say so you take a block and you connect these 2 points, so that makes another rack and that makes another tower. But the child is here to freely explore the different kinds of ways that can be done and create different things. So that's almost an example of a guided play. And structured play is when there are established rules which should not be broken. And once broken, you're not going to achieve the objective here, which means there is a clear cut objective in structured play, which means it is the stage where you're actually going to give any kind of objective, such as you win or you lose, such as you get this or you don't, such as this is more fun, this is less fun. So there are objectives to structured play. And structured play, by virtue of it, is a little bit more sophisticated, probably by the age of around 4, 5, and 6, when the child is slowly crossing over to your concrete operational stage. It can stay and stick to rules and self-instruct itself. This is when the child will start engaging more of this structured play. So you can see that there is a kind of a developmental impact in the kind of play the child can establish. More younger, more free play. More older, more structured play. Now, this does not mean just because the child is much older, it will not want to engage in guided play or free play. All kinds of play are applicable at all age levels. It is just what the child can choose and cannot choose to do. A child who is much, much younger, who's a toddler, cannot choose to engage in a proper rule-based game. But a child who is 6 to 7 and above can choose to do so as per his whims and fancies. The child can still choose to play as father is washing the car, it's going to plug in and then spray the water all around, and it's going to have absolute blast. And the same child can still sit and then play a little bit of Ludo with you now that you established this is what Ludo is. And for you to feel the experience of winning, you need to follow these rules. And if it turns out you will be the winner, that's going to be fun. So the child is going to wait for those moments and going to try for that reward. So every time you remember to design a toy, remember what kind of instructions or guidance or even a structure this will demand. And based on that, you're going to restrict a certain age group of population because more younger, less than the structure play. So that's the message that you need to remember. Next slide. And yes, so these are a little bit of examples here. As we looked at infants who are more in the sensory motor stage, you can imagine the kinds of toys that you would be getting to them, right? The funniest thing would be like you go to the first birthday of any of your cousins or your niece or nephews, and you buy an elaborate Scrabble, and people are going to look at you. Are you crazy? Like it's the age that kind of determines what the child can also do. So he or she is going to completely use their imagination. ignore your Scrabble and be absolutely fascinated by the small this Play-Doh or the small toy which will give a rattling sound, and that is going to make the child more happy. Right? So it's what the child wants and can do at that age. Infants love to do sensory exploration, right? Irrespective of their neurodiversity, much younger children prefer sensory and any kind of sensory exploratory games. So that's why if you look at all your fun school toys, they are beautifully given the age range to it. There's a science to this. Right? There's a level of cognition that is required for a child to properly enjoy that toy. So if you look at all your fun school and Fisher Price, for example, more younger, the toys are like more of experiential toys where it's all about the sounds and the vision and the kind of things that a child can touch and tactile exploration can be made. The child can even get some toys which is allowed for it to, put it in the mouth and enjoy the oral aspects of it. It can actually just explore all of its eight sensory aspects while the child is being young. And as we discussed, as the child is going to go into more of a 1.5, 2, reaches more into the pre-operational stage that the toddler is growing, here is the exploratory play takes over. Exploratory play basically has a little bit of a guidance, little bit of instructions, maybe one or two instructions that can be followed, but then the rest of it is left for the child to explore. So these are ages where the child will start exploring things like cars and robots and dolls that make fancy sounds and sing songs for them. So this is a child which knows like all I have to do is just press this button, but then I'm getting get something from this toy. There's a real time feedback. These are kids who love feedback. These are kids who are going to keep on trying different ways of playing. And the beauty here is the child is not going to almost always not going to follow exactly how it is supposed to. So if the child is given a stuffed toy that has to be operated in such a level where you press these buttons and some songs come out, you will hardly find that can happen most of the days. Some days this doll will be used as a bat. This doll will some days will be used as a ball. See, the creativity is still so intact here in this age that the child is just going to constantly explore the different functional aspects of it. So more malleable and more creative, and also with a little bit of instruction, this is exactly appropriate for these toddlers because they're always going to try and see and push the boundaries of any kinds of toys that you're going to give them. And slowly, as they're entering the preschool age, which I mean by 4 or 5 years, they're crossing the barrier towards your concrete operational stage. And here, obviously, the child's language capacity, social cognitions have started maturing. They're going to, like we just saw in the previous few slides, they're going to understand rules. They're going to grasp certain aspects of instruction that needs to be followed for me to have an objective. So the main goal here is to actually have a clear-cut objective when they are playing. So that's why children who are in preschool can engage in certain group activities where you can bring up toys which will encourage participation from many children. If you could remember some toys that the child like toys like a Hungry Hippo. I don't know if any of you've seen that toy, which is a very big hit. There are variations of it still there. All you do is there are four children who can sit together. You press a lever, there will be this hippopotamus who is going to open its large mouth and come towards the center of this toy play. And in between, now you throw in all the small pebbles and balls. So it's just basically the child has to keep on pressing the lever such that most of the balls get coming towards one side, and one who accumulates most of the balls by this wins. So this requires a lot of cooperation, right? You need to sit together. No child should be allowed to topple over the board and run away. That's not going to help the play. This is a child who knows like there should be something that we need to do. So the child still will sit down and freak and enjoy. And there is a rule to it, but at the same time, there's a lot of fun to it. So these are toys which are going to be really helpful as the child is in the age of 4, 5, and 6 and above, and lots of imagination starts taking over here. These are children who are going to love stories, who are going to create reasons and hypothetical imaginary situations in their head and try to grasp any kind of those imaginative play in everything they do. So these are children who can have your play, house play, or you can have tea parties with these children. These are children where you can have a couple of guns and then have a mission inside your house and you have to solve the mission and shoot the enemies. So those things are possible with these children as this age goes on. And as the child finally is in the school age, you really have more advanced reasoning. The child is able to conceptualize many things and derive meaning out of it. And soon, by the time they'll be teenagers, they'll even work in a formal operational level, which means They can deduce higher hypothetical situations and come up with solutions. So you give a lot of problem solving games here. You give a lot of puzzles here, and the children are going to take it up as a challenge. And you give a lot of competitive games here, which will push the child's competitive spirit, where the objective is to win or lose. So those things start applying as the child is going to grow. Next slide. So far, we're going to take the aspect of first understanding how a neurotypical child would normally benefit from all these things, and then we'll try to touch upon in the later slides how it is important for you to have an inclusive design when we deal with a neurodivergent case. Right now, this is a self-explanatory slide just for you to take account of these essential elements when you're looking at any kind of toy design. Toy design can really help in the play, and that kind of a play should be able to tap into many of these developmental aspects, and we go one by one. So when a child is engaging any kind of a play where there is a lot of visual-spatial orientation, the child is able to look into aspects of patterns and look into aspects of constructing things. You're basically teaching the child to explore, tap into its memory, pattern recognition, and all those things are basically going to help the child's cognition develop. The child is going to try so many of its own theories of cause and effect and going to find out like there are different ways that I could figure this out. A simple game such as a memory game where the child is going to open different images and then come back to where I could match these things are quite sufficient to develop the child's own cognitive capacities. And a lot of these games where you remember where you play things like Chidiya Udi, where you have to learn certain languages. There is a meaning to these things. And the child is able to use these language capacities and further expand on these language capacities as and when the child is playing. Right? So the next few slides are just going to explain you how basic certain games can still go on to contribute to more advanced cognitive capacities. Next slide. Yeah, so as you can see, some games where you're going to see role plays, right? This is a child who's going to now take into a chore police game, right? In Tamil, we'll call it film and police games, right? So the child is going to take certain roles, play out these roles, and have fun. And what is learning here is the social aspect of turn taking, sharing. This is a simple game, yet it taps into a lot of your social cognitions, right? And a lot of these games sometimes require a child to decipher certain body language cues and facial expression. I put the example of current pass. I'm sure many of you would have played this game where all of you connect hands and sit together. And right at the center, there'll be one person whose entire job is to find out the person who's constantly giving the signal from his hand. And the signal is basically just a small press on your inner hands, which slowly gets transferred to one by one, and the person has to catch. And how the person will end up catching the right signal is by looking at the facial expressions, looking at how someone is different in their body language. There's so much happening and so much is demanded from your social cognition for you to successfully play this game, right? And something as simple as a chore police would require so much of your empathy, so much of, as we saw last presentation, your theory of mind to develop so that you are putting yourself into the shoes of a thief or a person who is supposed to be scary and it's fun. So this is how a simple game can actually demand a lot of the social cognition. And by virtue of playing it, you're actually rather developing the same set skills. Right? Next. Again, understanding the emotional aspect of it. A child can just play some as a simple game as a dumb charades. A dumb charades would require so much of emotional expression where you take a particular situation or a particular theme and then you try to completely act it out in the way you are in your body language and your facial expressions. An interesting aspect of emotional development in games and plays when child actually takes in real life scenarios. Very often you see children playing the game of house. They take the roles of mother and father. They take the roles of teacher and student. And they actually enact what a teacher would say to the student and they actually reenact how they would react to that situation. And it's so beautiful how this helps them cope with their own life circumstances. They can actually play out any kind of their memory. And it is for a fact that a lot of children play out their difficult experiences or even trauma in their play, which is quite evident in how they are trying to relive those moments and try to make sense of it by a simple game of a role play, by a simple game which actually helps them process with their stress or even regulate their own emotions. And that's how magnificent sometimes play is. Because as psychiatrists, we have an actual entity or a modality called play therapy, where the important objective here is to allow the child to play with certain domains of his emotions, and we help the child regulate his emotions or even bring out certain aspects of its conflicts. And that's how powerful play can be for emotional development. Next slide. And of course, this is self-explanatory. The unfortunate part is most of us, when we look at play, we try to reduce it to only the physical aspect of it, which is probably the worst idea in all of age-old parenting adage when they say you have to allow the child to play. Why? Because the child is going to be healthy physically. That's just the superficial, iceberg effect, as they say. But yes, it is still important because a lot of our extreme situation in these days is because uh, there are toys which are such a good design, but they do not take into the aspect of giving equal importance to even the physical aspect of it, right? We are now living in the age where there are so much of sophisticated toys, but most of them sometimes we can make the mistake of neglecting the physical development. So there's probably a generational shift as to how play is understood. But traditionally, when we looked at play, most of them think it's only for the physical development. And now I'm sure pretty much we are aware that there are more to play than just physical development. Then we're also at a situation where we tend to forget the physical aspect of it. So this is just to highlight that there are so much of games that actually needs a good amount of hand-eye coordination and fine motor skills. Something as simple as gilli danda or playing a lattu, or if you could play that game of lagori. Lagori in Tamil we would call it, I think, kings or ice. You have to assemble the stones and then you have to hit the stones. So there are these games which require your physical and the hand-eye coordination to be on point for the fun to happen. And yet there's a lot of healthy physical development that takes over once we are playing these games. So this is just to remind again and again that physical development, although was overrepresented, we probably should not forget it right now on the other end. It's good to have a toy which can cover many of these domains. Thanks. Executive function, yeah, this is where we go to more advanced level where you're looking at toys which are actually tapping into more advanced executive functions like planning, like using your working memory, quick thinking, your impulse control, which is your capacity to stop yourself. So these are toys which require a higher cognition, probably a child who's a little bit into the pre-operation to the concrete level, but the executive functions are fully developed by then. And this is quite important when we'll reach the discussion of children who have ADHD. Obviously, every play requires executive function because when I started this session today, I told you there is a hierarchy, right? There's always a hierarchy. So the basic thing that I should do is just to capture the attention, and with the attention, the child require is to bring out all its executive functions so that the child is able to engage in play. So what are the games we saw so far? Something that starts from just blocks to a child who is involved in a social game like current pass, or a child who is playing in a physical sport. It all demands your executive functions. It all demands how much you're able to stop yourself, make the right decision, and execute the plans that you have in your head. Right? And sometimes games obviously can be simple enough to tap into these executive functions, and some games rather go on to the level of fully highlighting only the executive aspects. So one of the typical examples here would be a game where all you have to do is just press a button at the moment when you get a signal. And if you don't press properly, you're going to miss a chance. You're going to have multiple variations of this idea, right? So what it's basically trying to tell you is to stay focused and also immediately react. It's a game of proper reaction. It's also a game that is testing your impulse control, where you have to choose the right moment to react and all those things. And sometimes you can even make it a social game. One of the games is like if you could remember, Chidiya Wood is one of those classical games where you keep saying random things. It also involves a lot of language capacity. But you need to remember when someone says a particular thing which does not fly, and you raise your hand and say, "Udud," you're probably making a mistake there. So then there are these, yeah, there was just a little bit of interference. So basically, there are these games that are always going to require executive functions, but sometimes you can have designs which completely rely on a proper utility of executive functions, and those things will contribute for the development of executive functions. Next. And lastly, obviously, the most important aspect of all of play is to encourage further development and ensure the child goes into a more higher level of sophistication in terms of its thinking, where the child can push its imagination, can do something which is absolutely creative, and bring out its own rules into the game and have fun experimenting with its own rules. So very few games achieve that, where a child can actually create its own rules and modify the game according to its own rules, and it's still fun. And those are games that actually bring out new possibilities in the child's own capacity. And these are things which are still very, very difficult to achieve probably when we are looking at the most perfect toy. You know, the most perfect toy is something which engages all the cognitive domains and is applicable for all age groups and is ensuring the child is actually pushing its own developmental level so that it is going to enhance into the next level. So this is probably a highlight into why we are doing this competition, perhaps. If it's going to help the child develop certain life skills such as creativity and problem solving, probably, and that is something which is on the higher level of the spectrum, it only means that you have achieved all the others cognitive domain by the virtue of playing this game, right? So that's something to aspire for as you are working in this competition here. Next slide. So now we will just go into inclusive designs here. Next slide. Uh, this is just to remind you that one of the important things is when we look at children who are neurodiverse, you look at them through this lens of neurocognition capacities which are lacking in. Like when we look at a child of autism, you're looking at a child who does not have a proper social or language capacity. Right? And these are children who may require a little bit of lifting when it comes to the design, where the design is more easily recognizable for the child's social development level, more easily development aspect of language, which is made much more easier for this child to grasp. So those are kind of things, and especially when you're looking at things like children of ADHD who have very much underdeveloped executive function. So it has to take a little bit of account of their attention lacking or their impulse control issues. So it has to be more engaging in that way. So those are things which what we are trying to impart in this competition, where your design has to be inclusive, where you keep in mind the broad range of cognitive abilities that can happen from a neurotypical child to a neurodivergent child, and can see if your design is able to accommodate those deficits also. That's So going to our most of the discussion would probably be on this, our let's say the quintessential neurodiverse condition called autism. So I'll just run through what happens in autism again, because some of you did share questions on what I need is more examples, right? So I start by telling you this is a child who is labeled autism because of these following reasons. This is a child who has probably very good motor skills, right? This is a child who is able to take care of its own physical domain, and to some level even its own cognition. The child has some level of information gathering, probably has an amazing memory, but then what the child lacks is to get the social rules. The child is not able to look at, we saw how many levels are there when social development takes over, right? It starts from something as simple as recognizing some person's facial expression, to body language, to understanding how another person would experience a situation. So these are lacking in this child, and what this leads to is a certain set of deficits. Because the child will not take another person's perspective because of its social deficits, the child will stick to what the child knows. And in autism, that is why you typically see a child who is very, very rigid and very fixated upon what he or she likes, and they try to like a predictable environment, right? They do not appreciate too many changes or too many surprises, too many things that are again and again giving the child a new challenge to again figure out how this works. Like, so when we are designing any toys for autism, it is useful if there is a kind of a predictability to how it operates. A very, very constantly challenging or constantly showing multiple changes in how a toy would operate is probably something which a child with autism may find it a little difficult. So sometimes the simplicity of having a little bit of a prediction that can be done for this child and how something can be reliably operated in a particular toy would be very good for a child with autism. And as we saw, many developmental issues come with a lot of sensory processing issues as well. And especially children who are having autism, they again are going to be very rigid about their sensory needs. They're going to be very reactive towards their sensory issues. There are certain preferred temperature or touch or tactile things which every some child or every child uh, in the spectrum may have in terms of their preference. So if there is a toy that could actually accommodate those sensory sensitivities, it would be quite good for them. And obviously, what are you trying to achieve in any kind of improvement or therapeutic targets for autism is to target their communication, to target how much we're going to provide an opportunity for them to grow in terms of their social and language skills. And if your toy could have those designs in place where it is going to encourage or push the child to work a little bit more on its language or social cues, it would probably serve the purpose of being the perfect toy for autism. Right? Next. With ADHD, we are looking at the problem of executive dysfunction. So this is a kid who has a poor level of self-regulation. And what happens in ADHD is basically this is a child who has very poor inhibitory mechanisms. The child would not be able to give what we call a selective attention or leading to a proper impulse control. The child is just going to follow every cue around and probably not stop itself from responding to many of the cues around. And the child is constantly wanting, because of this constant source of physical movement and stimulation. So sometimes any toy which could accommodate all that would be the best toy for ADHD. And it's very, very notoriously children of ADHD get very easily bored. Right? And that's a huge challenge. If they are able to get captivated by this toy, which is somehow keeping the child hooked, and I'm very what do I say? Scared to say this that if the option of engaging an ADHD child is to use screen or any kind of mobile devices, it's probably the worst thing to do because what happens in most of the applications or mobile devices is with ADHD has when the mobile is in the hand is the child can constantly change whatever the child wants. The child can watch whatever it wants. The child is going to keep on scrolling whatever it wants. And you're not actually challenging the sustained attention of this child. And this would actually look like apparently the child is focusing, but no, the child is actually engaging with different cues every second and not trying to stick to one. That's what happens when you offer screen to ADHD children. They are more likely to get hooked to them. And that leads to a lot of doom scrolling. What you are supposed to do is create a toy that actually challenges this notion. It captures the child's interest and attention at the same time serves the purpose of sustaining the child's attention to one task. And that would be the golden proportion here, where you are going to have a design that would entice the child with ADHD at the same time ensure the child is sticking to one particular aspect of it. So the child's attention and cognition are being pushed. And even if you could have games where the child has to use its impulse control in order to win, that would motivate a child with ADHD to try and develop more of his or her inhibitory capacity. So these are the kind of ideas that you need to have in mind when you're designing for ADHD, or if you're going to have an accommodative design that would also help children with ADHD. Next. So other rules when it comes to inclusive design is keep in mind that it has to be accessible. A lot of times we remember that developmental issues in children can come together. We talked about conditions such as intellectual disability last time. Intellectual disability is when you have a developmental delay in all of the cognitive domains, starting from the physical aspects, the motor aspects, and then the language and social and everything. The learning is a little slower. Some kinds of toys, if it is very, very simple in terms of their design, are going to have a very, very simpler and a lower level where even children with intellectual disability can operate on. We saw how play can be different and based on the developmental level, right? Sometimes the simplest toys are the most suitable toys for children who have a developmental delay. So you're looking at more of a sensory based toys here, more of a free and just about a guided play that is required to engage this toy. And that leads to a good amount of what we call as accessibility. So it is applicable for many of these children. They can be a 7 or an 8-year-old kid who has some kind of intellectual disability, and they can also be children who are much younger in their age and probably have their uh, earlier phases of development. Just a second. Yeah. Just riding on the same point is the idea of having a little bit of a universal design. I think it is self-explanatory. You need to have toys which can adapt to the divergent needs of many of these children. And obviously, when we talk about modularity, is a toy which can slowly push the limits of the child, where the next level of skills are always demanded. So once you compete in one level, and if you master it, what mastery leads is to boredom, right? And while boredom, you need to have higher levels that can open up as the child is engaging with the play. So that would lead to more engagement and less of boredom. So that is something which can be aspired for. Next. Next. So when we're looking at the premise of adaptive toys, it's again tapping into those principles of inclusive design. Have a lot of adaptability where they're constantly evolving with the child. So that's one of the important aspects that can be utilized when we are designing, where as the child is playing, as the child's skills are improving, the toy is also able to throw up new challenges. The design is able to evolve where there is an another level after this level, and it's going to constantly push the child and evolve with the child. And sometimes any toy that is actively requiring the child's goals to be readjusted, where now that you've accomplished one target, now this is your next target, and it's constantly giving newer and newer challenges, is going to cause the child to completely absorb into the active learning aspect of it, and to constantly challenge its own cognitive level and try to push its own limits. So what play does is, as the child is engaging with this particular toy, it's also constantly trying to demand more of its cognitive capacities, which by virtue of habituation and practice is only going to develop as the child is actively engaging and learning with this topic. Next. And the idea of feedback is something which is very useful when you have a design where a lot of these children require that if I do something to this toy, do I know that I'm doing something to this toy? So one of the most important aspects of habitual learning is, especially when we talk about children who are at the level of toddler, is they are not sophisticated enough to completely read into the toys' goals. What they are basically looking for is, if I manipulate this toy, do I get something in return? If I manipulate this toy in however way I want, do I see something that is happening which is new for me? So that's what we mean by feedback systems and feedback loops in toys. So if you could have toys that give gradual feedback, or if you could have toys that could give immediate feedback, any kind of behavior does get enforced. If it's a toy that would require a constant amount of effort from the child and then something pops up that is going to focus on one aspect of cognition like attention. On the other hand, if it's a toy that you constantly, as much the child is engaging, something pops up or some kind of sound keeps coming up, that is going to tap into another domain of cognition. So you can choose to the demands of the child, and then the design can be adapted to the needs of the child. Right? Next. So just a brief run through some of the commonest toys that we know, but they are entailing a lot of sophistication within there. So as we go, next slide. Here you're looking at something like as simple as a puzzle-based toy, right? Everyone knows puzzles, right? But you can see how much the puzzle is engaging the child's memory, cognitive flexibility, creativity, the entire spectrum, right from the bottom attention level. It is captured by the colors here. Executive functions are required because the child has to plan and then try different patterns where this thing can fixate. And probably if you could involve an adult, there would be a lot of guidance that could be encouraged here. It's also encouraging the language, communication. And there's even a point where you can have some time set to this. And if you could complete the puzzle within a time, you win. So there could be rule-based games that could be established here. So lots of things can be done in something as simple as just a puzzle-based toy here. Next slide. Again, role-playing toys is something which is self-explanatory. The toys encourage real-life experiences to be enacted as the child is playing. It's going to help a lot of these emotional regulation and social situations that we saw. It can help the child deal with its own emotional issues, deal with its trauma, and learn more sophisticated social skills. Next. So these are your, again, these are established, well-established real-life examples of great design. So we move to these things called sensory toys. Sensory toys comes in all shapes and sizes. So I'm sure even right now as an adult, you can still engage in some of these sensory toys. You can just have a couple of these things and you can just try it out, the way it feels, the way it looks, the way it can just sound around you. All it does engage is basic sensory processing, and it's best suited for children who have sensory needs like autism, and obviously any kind of child who's in the much earlier phase of their infancy in their sensory motor level. So these are great designs which have been so useful till date, and some of these standard case studies are probably your inspiration. Next. Next slide. So just the message here is again a reiteration of the key ideas to remember when you are designing. Firstly, you need to know is your toy targeting any of these cognitive domains, and it has to start something as simple as attention, and it can slowly target. So always have a target cognitive domain in your mind when you're designing. And secondly, always remember the age and the developmental stage, because the toy's complexity and the child's developmental phase has to match properly so that the child is best engaged with the toy. So that should be some sort of a most important take-home message for you by the end of this session at least, is to remember the target cognitive domain and also remember the developmental stage for which you're designing. Next. So these are your challenges as you're going to design, perhaps to do so situation, demands more a simpler design or a complex design. Again, it is up to you as creative toy designers. It is up to what you're going for, but this is a challenge. Once you are going to design, you're going to have to take some decisions and choices. So what some of these situations could be: is the design more a simple or a complex one based on the purpose you're serving? And obviously, is your toy going to have a proper feedback mechanisms? What kind of feedback mechanisms should be encompassed in the design? And is the toy inherently fun? So when we talk about motivation, inherently is how much the toy is going to give a sense of reward for this child. The more reward as the child is going to feel, more fun it's going to get, and more the child wants to keep engaging and playing again and again. So this is where we saw, is there a level of modularity where the child can constantly find new rewards and new challenges and keep engaging. So how much is the intrinsic motivation within your design? Next. Next. Ultimately, this is a refreshing of the same point that we made when we talked about ADHD and screen time, right? If your toy is going to involve some kind of screen use or some kind of a app that is required for it to be downloaded or anything, some kind of ethical aspects have to be kept in mind. I keep saying this again and again. A screen or any kind of a phone-based kind of a play is something is as much as like giving kind of a substance of abuse to a child. Because what happens when you have a smartphone is endless source of new experiences which can happen by every second. And because it is going to capture so much of your attention, it is going to get some level of compromise in other aspects of cognition, such as sustained attention or utility of other kinds of physical aspects of play. So keep in mind when you're involving any kind of screen time in your design here. And obviously, the toy is going to collect certain data about the child. The safety and privacy have to be kept in mind. And the engagement should always be something which is of active and not just passive. And safety obviously is of prime importance when you're designing. The toy should inherently ensure that this does not lead to any kind of harm for this child. Next slide. Yeah, that's it. This is the end of the presentation. We can move on to the questions and clarifications. And if you could go to the next slide, I can take up some questions now. And next slide, please. You can also just note down the email ID. If I could not cover any questions, you might as well, mail me so that I would try to answer some of them in my time. But I think now I just request the organizers to take up certain questions and we'll see how it goes.
Those of you who have any questions, you can please unmute and ask. This is yeah, please go ahead. Whoever's raised your hand, please ask question.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
hello. Yeah, please
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah.
Yes.
So basically, I just wanted to know because this neurodivergent kids, what happens with them is they get bored with the toys very easily, even if we get them all the sensorial experiences and all. So, what is your suggestion, doctor, that we can, try something which might not get them bored and, get them engaged and for longer period of time, maybe?
Uh, so the truth is, you cannot have any kind of a standard formula because by virtue of humans, you're always going to want to try new things. So there is always an expiry date for any toy. So let's be very clear about that. But what
Yeah.
can change is how you are able to engage with the toy with a newer idea. That is what you need to remember. For a child to constantly engage with a toy, it's like a child is having multiple experiences with the same toy. The toy could be the same thing. So that is what is going to decide how much this toy is going to capture the child's attention or even the level of engagement is how much new experiences this child can do. So this is also going to be determined by how creative the people around the child is. Right. Uh, I can be blunt with this point, but let me be very clear. One of the other questions someone asked is also somewhere related to this. A child is going to get bored, and what if there is no real improvement with only play? Can play alone be useful for the child? The toy alone can help the child to develop or not? So, the brief here is it's always the toy and the person. It's always the toy and the people in the environment which is going to help a neurodivergent kid, right? If we're all
Yes.
here sitting and believing that the toy alone is going to do the miracle, then we are probably shooting too much here. Got
So
it?
we also have to consider the secondary and tertiary stakeholder rather than just the user. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Hmm.
That's going to decide a lot of your outcomes there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Velprashanth. Yeah, thanks.
Hello, doctor. So, is there any gender specificity to the type of toy we use or the engagement involved in the usage of toys?
Gender expressions are very culturally defined. So, the kind of engagement that culturally defined expression is going to contribute will reflect on how a child will engage, because solely the design alone is not going to be determining what gender is going to engage. But then, interestingly, there are certain cognitive differences in gender which may be helpful for you. So, what we have understood in the current evidence is uh, more of your typical male brain with your XY chromosome is more of a problem solving pattern seeking brain. There is more engagement with things and less engagement with the social and the people aspect of it and the meaning aspect of it. The female brain, XX, has a little higher, and again, there is not much a big difference yet, but there is a little higher tendency to look at the broader picture where there is more meaning that is required, more role playing and the social aspect of it. So that is why even across cultures there is a tendency for male children to engage with more of things like blocks and cars and those kind of things, and female children to have more engagement with things such as dolls and toys which have characters and real life role play situations. But that then again, this will always have a lot of cross utility here, and there are no real hard and fast deterministic aspects of only this design is suitable for girls. There are children always going to be trying different things. It is again the environment that is going to largely implement how the child is going to engage with this toy.
Thank you, doctor.
Uh,
Yes,
Hello, sir.
yes, please go ahead.
Hello. Sir, what kind of materials or combination of materials we can use while designing
Pardon me, I'm
neurodivergent
not
children
exactly what you said. Can you repeat
so
your question?
that I can engage more?
I'm really sorry, I could not catch your question. Probably it's a network issue from my side. Could you repeat your question?
Yes, yes, sir. So, what kind of materials are common in designing the toys for neurodivergent children so that they can engage more?
What kind of stuff did you ask in terms of material?
Materials. What? Yeah, on materials.
Again, I have only one answer for this. See, uh, anything that is pleasurable, right? It should be ethically safe. At the same time, it should not cause any harm to the child. At the same time, the sensory aspects are going to be pleasurable. There are children who are going to love soft, squishy toys, and there are children who like slimy toys, and there are children who like hard and bouncy toys. It's going to be different for each, right? The sensory needs are different for every single child. So that's where the design requires a kind of a universal modality, right? It can tap into many of the sensory needs and still be accessible for many. So that's where your role probably comes here.
Hello, sir. Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Um, thank you for the session. Um, I was wondering because the focus was on autism and ADHD. So, should in the toy designing, should we also like restrict to these two, or like should we also consider others like intellectual disability and learning?
Definitely. See, the kind of neurodiversity that we are trying to deal with here is any aspect of these neurocognitive domains which are not yet fully functional or not yet evolved in a child. So that makes this child a neurodiverse, right? So the word unfortunately was created. The word neurodiversity came mainly because it was useful for people living with autism and people who are on the spectrum. But of course, please do not restrict yourself to only the aspects within the domains of autism. And when we talk about intellectual disability is very simple to understand. There is a larger gap between your chronological physical age and the mental age, and that is basically intellectual disability for you. A person with intellectual disability has a global developmental delay here. So he or she could be of age of 10, but their mental capacities is still of a person who's age 5. So here it only means that a person who's designing a toy for a 5-year-old would be probably useful for this person who's 10-year-old, but at the level of his mental capacity, he's still 5 and he's going to have a good time playing with this toy. A person who's having a profound intellectual disability, say a person who's at the age of 5 or 6 years, but still all his capacities are much, much younger of, say, an infant, he still not learned to walk. You'd again prefer more of a sensory toy. So that's again up to you. As you understand intellectual disability, it is basically the kind of developmental age that you need to target, which will be suitable for that particular person with a disability.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, I don't know whether the question what I asked is related to the topic or not, but this thing I should know. A child who is like always sucks his thumb, is there any alternate way of sensory, to calm him rather than stopping this? I mean, you can't stop that easily. That's what I just want to know. Is there any way of alternate way to calm him other than thumb sucking? Is there any toy or something like
So
that?
the sensory profile has to be understood here. A person who prefers thumb sucking has some kind of a oral requirement here. So there's a lot of oral sensory seeking that this child needs. And often what happens when there is a sensory seeking behavior, for this case, it is the thumb sucking or any kind of sensory seeking behavior, the purpose would be for this child to use this sensory behavior to calm himself or herself. So as you rightly pointed out, it is again trying different modalities here. Right. In autism, sometimes we would prefer certain toys, which are again your teething toys, which are alternatives for thumb sucking or even biting. Sometimes children with autism have some of them tend to develop this extreme teething behavior, and they would do it when they are at tremendous stress. And sometimes this leads to them using their own hands and fingers to teeth, and it leads to a lot of self injurious behavior. So here, any alternative toys which would serve the same purpose as teething, some soft rubber materials which can be bitten into and gives a lot of sensory pleasure. It's perfect replacement. Instead of biting the hand, the child is going to bite the toy. So it's again finding the right replacement, which is more safer for this child. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So there are some questions on the chat. I will read out those.
Yeah, please.
When we talk about 13 to 16 in adolescence, what level of interactivity is needed to maintain focus and concentration? Basically, what kind of toys would help their concentration?
As a person who's 13 to 16, they're almost as good as an adult. So the question is something you can ask as a person, put yourself in their shoes. If you were a fun-loving adolescent or a person who has your needs, what kind of toys would engage you? For a teenager, it is not just a toy, right? With teenager, what we have tried to understand here, the development has taken that advanced level of formal operation where abstract thinking, more bigger meanings are important here, right? And a person would just engage with any toy, but has a higher meaning to it. A teenage person can engage with a toy, which is something as simple as a gun or a nerf gun, but there should be a social context to it. If he or she is playing with his cousin or he or she is playing with his own peers, there comes the fun element, right? So the context or the objective of play is much more advanced for an adolescent. It is probably not just about winning or losing. Probably there is a meaning that you attribute. So that's why a lot of your online role playing games are very attractive to your adolescents, right? Because there is so much rich meaning in them. They want to take up the role of this warrior or this person on a mission, and there is probably a team play where you're together targeting and you're fighting or shooting or doing all sorts of things, but there's a higher meaning and a higher objective. So for that level, it has to be much more sophisticated with a higher objective. That's the message here. Hope that answers your question.
Another question in the chat is, do musical toys help in any cognitive development?
Yeah. Again, music, sound, audio, it's a sensory aspect to it. And if you could add the LMC, this is again a perfect way you can have a more inclusive and universal and also a modular design. Simple music toy could be used where this just the sensory aspect, you play the song and you have fun. And slowly you have another level to this toy where you can manipulate with the sound and you get a different objective. So there could be a little bit of gamification in this. And then you can have a more of an elaborate puzzle based where you have to follow patterns of music and then come up with some solutions, or you get reward or feedbacks which says only when you play in this pattern you get some response. So yes, again, there are so many levels through which you can utilize something as simple as a music and again design it based on your level or the developmental level that you are going for.
Are there any other questions for sir? Please, audience is encouraged to unmute and ask.
Hello, am I
Yes.
audible? Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Doctor. Good evening. Thank you for the session. It was very informative and very nicely put together. My question is that now I am ADHD diagnosed, and what I've noticed a pattern in me is that I have had I've had phases where I've indulged in activities and I've gone into a sort of a hyper focus. And I have been involved in that for multiple hours without realizing that time has passed. And this is something that I remember has been happening to me since I was quite young, since I have started having memory. Now, if I develop if we design a toy and then there is something, and the child goes into hyper focus, is there a way we can, I mean, do we provide a mechanism that sort of breaks the hyper focus, or how do I go about that? Because this is something that is highly possible.
Yeah, so for others here, what ma'am has described is there's something called hyperfocus zones that happens in ADHD. See, we talked about ADHD as a condition where there is a problem of impulse control per se, right? You tend to do what you are inherently enjoying more rather than things that you're supposed to do. That's something which commonly happens in ADHD. And if a person with ADHD has found something that they're so passionate about, it is so intrinsically rewarding, it's so much fun, it almost is going to trap the person with ADHD into a zone where they're completely stuck doing that only. And that is going to look like the zone of hyperfocus. Now, if this hyperfocus is leading to, again, the objective here matters. Let's say a person with ADHD is hyper-focused into solving a puzzle, and there is an end point where the puzzle has been solved. You inevitably have to move on to the next game, right? So you always have an endpoint with some person where they have reached, they've completed the level, and then they have to now choose something else to do. Some games, some activities are inherently highly productive and are also having no real endpoints. Let's say a person of ADHD who's interested in chess, perhaps. I mean, chess, the sky is the limit, right? People can keep developing the skills in chess and go on and on and on in their ELO ratings. So here, yes, they are going to be hyper focused and going to be stuck with chess. But let's say if that person is also going to be a professional chess player, it will play out well in the end. So again, the objective here is important. Again, this is also commonly an issue when ADHD people enter online gaming. If your objective is to become an esports champion, fine. But if you're avoiding the troubles of your life and then you're playing any kind of a battle royale game and you're hyper focused in battle royale game while you're avoiding the problems in your life, you're not having the right objective there, and that's going to lead to a problem. So yes, there are some aspects to it that you need to remember. It's the ultimate objective that can kind of decides, and you can have maybe mechanisms where you have a clear cut endpoint, and maybe some designs where you can have a self feedback that says like this is probably the end of this level and then you need to stop. I don't know. There are games which also have certain attention parameters where you've played for so long and you know that you need to stop and take a break. So many things can be done where you can give a clear cut endpoint where you don't have to go any further.
Got it, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good evening, doctor. I had a question. So, children with ADHD can often experience emotional meltdowns because their executive functioning, like you mentioned, is low, and they can't change context and stabilize themselves. So, is there any kind of play or interaction that you can suggest that can help them develop emotional stability in the long run, or as a more complex theme, maybe resilience?
The social learning aspect is very useful here, because a person who has impulsivity, right? When we talked about again ADHD having a problem of impulsivity, here it's the emotional impulsivity that we're talking about. So once this person is going through any sort of trouble, when the emotions are overwhelming, it is so difficult for them to stop that emotion, right? So they actually require a more of a therapeutic approach here, where you have to teach a person, self-regulation skills in terms of teaching them certain distress tolerance. So you let the emotions out, but in a non-destructive way. Then once your emotional systems have come down, like we saw the levels of brain, right? Once their mammalian brain is again not in control, and their neocortex takes over, they start finding that they need to catch hold of themselves and stop. So it's again a practice, right? You need to put them through certain social situations where they practice these inhibition, or come into a situation where they are actively engaging in their emotional regulation and distress tolerance skills. So these are skills that needs to be practiced. So, if there is any relevance to toy design here, again, it's again a game where you're going to think of a person who's going to challenge his own emotions. There are games which are called frustration games, which are very commonly used in experimental models. You try to frustrate a person and see how much they're able to tolerate and keep hold of their emotional impulsivity and still pursue. You have a lot of cognitive tasks that we engage in a person with ADHD while we are assessing their impulse control. So it would be something like constant failure again and again. You push them to their high frustration and then check if they're able to again sustain on the task or not. So maybe there are games that could challenge these notions, and by virtue of them practicing this inhibition through this game, they're probably developing their inhibition towards their even emotional impulsive situations. So I hope I have answered your question. You can just clarify
Thank
again.
Yes, thank you. No, but I do believe at the same time, if we're designing toys for children and if we're going to involve like a idea of frustration into it, it can very easily be abandoned. The
Yeah,
game. So it's something that it's a little
but it
challenging.
should have a level of modularity. It should have some easy levels to higher levels, or probably there should be
Correct.
a instruction beforehand so that they're mentally prepared to enter this game. There's so many aspects to it, probably, that as designers you need to consider.
Understood. Thank you so much, Doctor.
I have a few more questions in the chat. I'll read that up. Can a toy created with neurodivergent children in mind can be also be used beneficial for neurotypical children?
That is the whole point of this lecture, right? I think if you're designing something, you try to ensure that this is a universal design. That is probably where it's your skill set that you're trying to, tap into and come up with these designs. And I'm sure that's the whole point of this competition, where you make this happen, where a design is useful for any kind of children, both neurotypical and neurodivergent, and it can tap into all of their limitations as well and try to help them, push them. So, yeah, it is possible. Of course, it is.
Another question from the chat. I would like to know about hand dominance development and its milestone in children. Will it impact their learning? Example, reversal, right and left confusion, etc.
This again is a developmental issue. What typically is supposed to happen in brain, I hope you all remember that as the brain is evolving, it starts having neuronal migration, neuronal differentiation. So as the brain is constantly evolving, there is hyper specialization of areas, which means you're supposed to develop a hand dominance, which is a sign of hyper specialization. So very rarely you have people who are ambidextrous at the same time have a higher fine motor skill set equally on both sides. Even in those people who are ambidextrous, you will find one hand little bit more dominant than the other. Got it? So I think the question is, if there is a problem of not developing hand dominance, is there going to be issue? That again is a mark of a developmental issue. So you might as well design a game or something of a task through this play where they're trying to establish this dominance, which actually means you're trying to develop their fine tuning of motor skills in at least one side, and that's a mark of development actually. So a well developed brain tends to show clear-cut dominance of side preference. Did that answer your question?
Last call for questions. We will start wrapping up after this. If anyone has any more questions, please unmute.
Hello. So, is it good to encourage kids to use fidgety toys or fidget spinners, like to calm their anxiety or stress? Like, there could be negative effects of it too, right?
So, why do you believe there should be a negative effect of it? Maybe it's in the context of.
Like, imagine they are in their classroom and they are getting stressed, and so it's like breaking the decorum, right? Like, they take it with them everywhere. They're gonna stick with it for all the things. So in that way.
Person who, yeah, I do get the point you're making. So you're trying to say, like, while they are engaging with a fidget toy, wouldn't it be a more of a socially distracting or a disruptive behavior for others to see, right? Is
Yeah,
that what you're?
yeah.
Unfortunately, when we're talking about fidget toys, we're talking about a person with most likely ADHD or have aspects of executive deficits. These persons are going to fidget no matter what. It's not like they choose to fidget, they end up fidgeting. So, what fidget toys are supposed to do is give a more clear cut direction to that fidget. If you notice any person who has these executive deficits, be it a combination of intellectual disability, having ADHD feature, a person with typical ADHD, or a person who has autism and also have these issues, now they're going to fidget in however way they like. They're going to tap their feet, they're going to bang the table, or they're going to make some sounds with their nails. They're going to fidget no matter what because that's their whole problem. What a fidget toy does is it's like almost creating a canal for this river to flow in a proper way. And this is where inclusive classroom designs are supposed to encourage. A person who's in an inclusive classroom is allowed to have a fidget toy which gives direction to their fidgeting nature, and the teacher is okay with it. I hope you understand what I'm saying. This is what we're supposed to aim at. Have a classroom where inclusive children are allowed to express their own neurodiversity, and it's okay as long as it's not creating too much of disturbance. If a person is quietly just rotating their fidget spinner and is not really causing noise by banging their feet, it's still a better solution, right?
Yeah, got it.
I will read another question from the chat. What are your views on bringing back puppetry as a tool for intervention?
Magnificent. It's so powerful. We use it actively as a intervention when we deal with children's trauma, when we deal with children's emotion regulation. It's a commonly used modality in all of child therapeutics. So yeah, it's going to be magnificent if you bring in puppets.
All right, with that, we'll conclude today's session. Thank you, Dr. Velprashanth, for the insightful and illuminating session. We hope all participants have gained valuable knowledge from this workshop. The information presented will be essential as you progress through the competition. The recording and presentation from today's session will be made available. Cognify invites participants from across India to develop toy concepts and promote cognitive development and inclusivity for neurodivergent children. The next workshop in continuation with this one will be held on 20th October by Professor Austin Davis on toy design. The competition consists of 3 rounds. 2 online and 1 offline. Round 1 has already started and will end on 26th October. Here, participants will complete a questionnaire focused on toy design and neuroscience. Teams that advance will receive personalized mentorship for round 2. Participants submit a detailed video, written report, or presentation explaining the toy's design, including blueprints and dimensions. The finalists of this round will present their physical prototypes at IIT Madras during Shaastra 2025. I would like to thank Dr. Velprashanth Venkatesan again for this amazing session. I would also like to thank our title partner, Help Them Shine, for their contributions to our initiative. Help Them Shine is the first company in India that offers global therapeutic and therapy products for special needs children. To know more, please visit their website at www.helpthemshine.com. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day and attending this workshop. Best of luck for round 1. If you have any questions or are interested in collaborating, please feel free to contact us at rewire@shastra.org. Please ensure that you and your teammates have joined the WhatsApp group, as this is mandatory for facilitating further communication. Also, make sure to share and spread the word about this competition with others who may be interested. Please fill in the feedback form given in the chat. Small correction, the toy design workshop the deadline for the for round 1 of the competition is on 26th October.